Morning. My name is Wilbur L. Carpenter. I go by the nickname of Pete. Rather than that name, most people don't even know what my first name is. I'm kind of one of the older guys. I just turned 88 years old, and I'd like to tell you a little bit about my entry into the Air Force on the 10th of July, 1950. I arrived at Randolph Air Force Base. My first flight was in a T-6 in the front seat, and I made the takeoff. I couldn't believe it myself, and I still don't believe it. And on through the program into the F-80, T-28, and then the F-80, and flew a tour in Southeast Asia at that time, Korea, and came back home from that. And then scattered all over the world from time to time. It's a pretty interesting life, but maybe not to someone that's listening to this. Well, I have several favorite stories, I suppose, depending on the listeners, whether they appreciate it or not. I started out in the 100 back in 1957, and I think I had 2 or 3 rides in it, and I became an IP. We only had the D, which was a single-seat model at that time, where I checked out. But one of my favorite stories, I guess, was way down the list in about 1959, November 1959. I had just been to survival school at Stead and had returned to the base, and we were alerted to go on a deployment. And my squadron commander says, "You don't have to go because you've been away," and I said, "No, that's part of my responsibility." So I grabbed an airplane, had to wait for one that was being repaired, and landed at Myrtle Beach late in the evening. Next morning, went to briefing, and there's a lineup of the aircraft, and guess what? I'm on an F instead of the D that I flew with a passenger. And I said, "I didn't fly that airplane here." And the boss says, "Well, you're going to fly." And I said, "Well, who is it?" And he said, "Oh, it's a VIP." I said, "Okay." Anyway, we arrived at the aircraft, and sure enough, it wasn't ready to fly. There were panels all off of it. And I asked the crew chief what the problem was. He said, "It had a fuel leak, but we think we've got it repaired, but you're not going to be able to make this mission because the other airplanes are cranking up." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make a walk around, and when you're ready to run the airplane up to check for the fuel leak, I'll get in it. And if it doesn't leak, you put the panels on and I'm going." And he looked at me kind of funny. He says, "Sir, you can't do that." And I said, "Why can't I?" I said, "The general's in the back seat. He's briefed, and I'm going to get in, be ready to go." And sure enough, cranked up, and the airplane worked fine, and I taxied out and barely caught the flight. And from there on, it was little things, little incidents that happened. It's more of a funny story and all of the different things that occurred. But as we passed one of the islands, the first island, about 200 miles east, we were fueling off of KB-50Js. It's the old B-50 prop job, and we're tooling along, and the weather's not really too great. Finally got in contact with them, let down, got hookups, and stayed on for a little while because we had a long ways to go to the Azores, and took our gas, called for drop off, and we climbed out, and the squadron commander asked for check-in. Guess what? One of the aircraft didn't report, and I was elected again. Call the tankers and find out if he is still on the tanker. I called, sure enough, one coming in. "Yeah, I still have one hanging on." And, "Well, have him drop off, pick up such and such heading." I go back and tell the squadron commander that. He says, "Okay, you stay back and wait for him." Now I've got a 2-star in the back seat, and he and I are going to look for a second lieutenant out over the North Atlantic. Well, after a little while, I made several turns, lit the burner, all sorts of things to get he finally caught up and saw me, and with a shrieking voice, he says, "I have you." And he joined up, and I couldn't get him more than 2 feet off my wingtip from there on. He wasn't about to be left behind again. We hit the tankers at the Azores and started climbing out, and it was getting dark. He climbed out, hit some weather, stayed in it, crossed the coastline of Spain and France. There's a little corner there, Biscayne Bay, and there was a quick little break, and I saw that. It was dark, and I could see the lights in the shadow. I could see where the coastline was, and I called the lead and told him that we had passed the checkpoint, and he says, "Are you sure?" And I says, "Yes." And he said, "Well, contact the tankers." He kept going almost due east. I called the tankers, and they said we were on station, ready to refuel. And I called him back and says, "Hey, make a left-hand turn to such and such heading." We're still on the weather. We're almost to the tankers, and we break out on top, and here's the beautiful lights of the KB-50s. Have a great deal of respect for the KB-50s and those crews, believe me. As we were approaching the flight lead says speed brakes announced, I left mine up along with my wingman and headed for the tanker. I was about to run out of gas. I didn't yell or anything, but as soon as I contacted my tanker, I called Marseille and asked them what the weather is. I may have to land. And he called, in 30 seconds he came back and he says, "It's 00 with light rain." And oh my, anyway, I pulled up behind the tanker, and the first time I just tipped the drogue and started talking to myself. I forgot the guy in the back seat. And as we come in, he says, "That's right, son, take your time." So, anyway, I got my gas, and my wingman couldn't get on the tanker, so I backed off and let him have my side. Got our gas, and we were high apart with this time again. So we dropped off and headed out, and I get to a place called Châteauroux, and I'm level at 32 or 32.5, something of that sort. And I look back to the right at about 30 degrees, and here comes 2 airplanes. I mean, they're really coming. I said, "Hey, lead, is that you?" And he says, "Raj, I'm coming up." I said, "Okay, what altitude?" He was my same altitude, so I said, "Okay, I'm going 1,000 feet lower." We journeyed on to Chaumont, where was our original destination. And again, the weather was about 20 to 22,000 feet. He let down. 2 minutes later, I started my penetration. Wingman with me. We hit the low station and picked up GCA. And as we were coming up on the start of our descent, GCA says, "Go to your alternate, the runway's closed." And I don't have enough gas to go. I would like to continue. There was nobody there. They went to another frequency. And I said, I can't go any other place, because I knew that Châteauroux was having a problem. And I continued and made an ADF approach to about 250 feet, broke out right on heading on the runway, and my wingman is sitting there perfectly. We touched down, both of us got chutes. Here's another airplane's light shining from the other direction at us. I said, "You gotta be kidding me." It turned off, fortunately. We taxied in. I opened the canopy, and the general climbed out and patted me on the shoulder and gave me a thumbs up, and I shut down. Well, what had happened, my flight lead, and also who was my squadron commander, had gotten a no-shooter, and he went straight into the barrier, and that was the reason the runway was closed. Number 2 guy lost his chute, but he had gone around and made a second approach, came back in, and he got stopped before he got into the overrun. And that was he that had turned around and started back the other direction. So it doesn't sound like a hairy situation, but when you're working under those conditions, it is. Fortunately, John Preston was impressed, and about a month later, we were back at Canada, and he stopped in and had someone call me to come out and have dinner with him. John Preston ended up being commander of USAFE, as a matter of fact, later on. He was a nice gentleman. That's just one of the little stories. Some of the others are hairier, but I'll let it be with that one, okay?